Welcome back to the GCN Racing News Show. This week, why does pro cycling have fake fixed races? I'll be looking back at Jonas Vingegaard's win at the Singapore Criterium, as well as looking at Fem van Empel setting records in women's cyclo-cross and the beef that continues in the men's. We've also got news of Sonny Colbrelli retiring from pro cycling, and we have more information about Doug Ryder's brand new pro team. This week in the world of racing, we learnt that Intermarché-Wanty-Gobert's team bonding this year involves pushing your teammates into a lake. That was Taco van der Hoorn taking his second win of the season, ahead of a sinking Biniam Girmay and Maddis Michels. We also learnt this week in racing that Tadej Pogačar is already braced for the 2023 Tour de France. Here he was at the presentation of the race last week. Very stylish today. Unfortunately, no rapping though from Pogačar on stage on this occasion, but hopefully his new video will be dropping very soon. And finally this week, we learned that Jonas Vingegaard wrapped up his incredible season with a win at the Singapore Criterium presented by the Tour de France. Now I say it that way because the win would have been decided between the riders before they even clipped into their pedals. What ensued is cycling's version of WWE, a series of orchestrated moves before the premeditated outcome materialises. And it's not unique to the Singapore Criterium or to the Saitama Criterium, which is this coming Sunday. Exhibition races have been going on for donkey's years. Normally in the form of post-tour crits. So a few decades ago, when wages were much lower, pro cyclists could make a hefty sum of money by travelling around Europe after the Tour de France, receiving appearance money at each event they competed at. Some riders used to manage to string 20 together on consecutive days, with barely a break after the Tour de France had finished. Now, the riders who had been most successful at that year's Tour de France would normally command the biggest envelope of cash at the start, and they'd invariably win, unless a local professional had successfully negotiated ahead of the race. All harmless fun in many respects because the stars got to supplement their income without going too deep in terms of physical exertion, whilst the local public got to watch the stars of the sport come to town. And who would they most enjoy seeing winning? The biggest name, of course, so everyone's a winner. However, back in those days, the races were not televised. You simply watched from the side of the road and had a party before, during and after the race. There was one post-tour crit that I did a couple of times in Quillon in the south of France, where if you threw your bead onto the side of the road by the bar, they'd fill it with beer and hand it back to you the next lap. Great fun. Now those post-tour criteriums are now falling by the wayside. I think partly because wages are higher, so there's less need for the riders to supplement their income, partly because the race calendar is more packed than it's ever been, and I'd imagine partly because the more informed cycling fan has become wise to the illusion. But whilst European events have dwindled, others have popped up in other places. The big difference though now is that they are televised. And to my mind, they just look a little bit ridiculous to a hardcore cycling fan. I mean, who'd have guessed that the winner of this year's Tour de France would win solo ahead of a man who's won the Tour de France 4 times, Chris Froome, who in turn outsprinted a rider who's won every Grand Tour, Vincenzo Nibali. And who'd have thought that Mark Cavendish and Jasper Philipsen, teammates on the particular day, would dominate the intermediate points competition, but then be unable to follow Vingegaard's blistering attack on the fast, flat circuit. So is it still all harmless fun? Yes, I would say. I mean, it's not often that cycling fans in Singapore or Japan or wherever else get to see top riders up close. And those events might just inspire a whole load of kids to take up the sport themselves. I mean, it's not something I would choose to watch personally. I imagine most devoted cycling fans don't, but it's also not something that offends me in any way. I would love to hear your thoughts on them though. Let me know in the comment section down below. On to cyclo-cross now, and we had the first full weekend of top-level racing of the season last Saturday and Sunday. I will start with the fourth round of the UCI World Cup, which took place at a brand new venue in Maasmechelen, Belgium, right near the border with the Netherlands. Now, the course had mixed reviews, which I will get onto later, but first up, the racing itself. In the women's, we saw the return of Marianne Vos to top-level cyclo-cross racing for the first time since she won the World Championships in Fayetteville at the start of this year. However, while she had a decent start, she never really threatened the front runners on the day. The three strongest riders in the race were Puk Pieterse, Shirin van Anrooy, and of course, the woman who's dominated all three rounds up to that point, Fem van Empel. The trio were locked together for much of the race, and despite a late charge by Denise Betsemer, would decide the podium positions between them. It all came down to the final lap, and just as she has done for most races this season, Van Empel made a very late attack and just had a little bit too much power for Pieterse, who once again had to settle for second, with Van Anrooy taking a first World Cup elite podium in third. Vos crossed the line in 6th place, but we can be sure that her best form is yet to come. Van Empel, though, has now won the first 4 rounds of the UCI World Cup, something which hasn't happened, as far as I can see, since Daphne van der Brand won all 7 rounds of the World Cup in the 2005-06 season. Van Empel now has a very commanding lead, as you'd imagine, in the overall series. Just 10 points separate Denise Betsema in 2nd from Inge van der Heijden in 5th, but Van Empel is 72 points ahead of everybody. In the men's, we also had 3 riders locked together, the usual suspects of this season so far, teammates Eli Iserbyt and Michael van Turenhout, with former teammate Lauren Sweeck there for the ride. Now, it looked like history was going to repeat itself as Iserbyt started to turn the screws, but he just turned them a little bit too far and hit the deck on a descent, finding himself with a lot of ground to make up on the front of the race. Now, in crashing, he also held up his teammate Van Turenhout, leaving Sweeck out front alone. And Sweeck, as you will have heard a couple of weeks ago on the Racing News show, is the nearly man of World Cup racing. And so even when he built up a lead of half a minute, you wonder where it was all going to go wrong for him. And it almost did. He had a puncture and a resulting bike change that cut his advantage in half, but he was more than strong enough to bring it home and take his first ever elite World Cup victory. And how deserved was that? I've got to say, I was so pleased for him, especially after all the beef in the press between him and Iserbyt over the last couple of weeks. With Van der Haar in 2nd on the day, Iserbyt 3rd and Van Turenhout 4th, it leaves the men's World Cup standings a lot closer than the women's. Iserbyt sits on top, 145 points, which is 23 ahead of Sweeck, 51 ahead of Van Turenhout in 3rd. So what about the course then? Well, I would say, from a viewer's point of view, that it was great. A lot of that was down to some really cool drone shots they had of the riders that gave a real sense of the speed they were travelling and the atmosphere at the venue. So I really enjoyed it. But both Van der Haar and Iserbyt were critical of the course, which apparently had a lot of stones and sharp flints. Here's what they had to say in their post-race interviews.
I think a lot of people flattered today. It was a very dangerous course. I think if it would rain here, we would have the same as World Championship Bielers. I don't think you can ride here when it rains. Yeah, I don't think I think it's a course for a World Cup.
I think there are too much stones for a World Cup, so this is definitely not a race to do next year.
Yeah, Lars van der Haar just said the same thing.
Yeah, this is not a World Cup track to race on.
So their thoughts are pretty clear, I think it's fair to say, but I'd love to hear yours. What did you think of the course yesterday for the UCI World Cup? Again, let me know in the comment section down below. I bet if Lauren Sweeck comments though, he will say he absolutely loved it. The previous day, at the first round of the Super Prestige Series in Ruddervoorde, we had the same riders on the podium in a different order. It was another day where punctures played their part. 2/3 of the way into the race, Van der Haar seemed to have an unassailable lead over Sweeck and Iserbyt, but a flat tyre saw him fall back. The man who took advantage was Iserbyt, who went clear on the penultimate lap of the race, never to be seen again. Sweeck, who'd end up in 2nd, did give a demonstration of his strength that day though. He was the only rider who managed to ride the sand section right to the top of the climb. That was very impressive to watch, I've got to say. Shame he couldn't take advantage. In the women's race, things were a little more clear-cut. Denise Betsema managed to get clear of Inge van der Heijden on the 5th lap of 6, eventually crossing the line just over half a minute clear of her compatriot. Ceylin del Carmen Alvarado rounded off the podium with 3rd on the day. This week on GCN Plus, it's another big week of cyclo-cross. If you've got the time, I thoroughly recommend tuning in for the first round of the X2O series tomorrow, as it's the Koppenberg Cross, one of the toughest circuits of the entire season, with the ascent up the infamous Koppenberg at the end of every lap and at the very start of the race. Coverage of the women's race will begin at 12:40 GMT, so 13:40 CET, with the men's race following soon after, and it's available to watch in all GCN Plus territories, excluding Belgium. This weekend, though, it's the European Championships, which are taking place in Namur in Belgium, another legendary and extremely tough course. I'd say both races this week are a lot different to everything we've seen so far in the cyclocross season. So on Saturday, it's the U23 men's event, followed by the elite women. Then on Sunday, we have the U23 women, followed by the elite men. And it's the under-23 women's race that could be the most fiercely fought of the whole weekend. Reports were suggesting that the 1, 2, 3 from yesterday's Elite World Cup, Fem van Empel, Puk Pieterse and Shirin van Anrooy, will all compete in the under-23 race as opposed to the Elite. However, it's now being reported that Van Empel, at least, will compete in the elite category, which feels very much like the right decision given her form so far this season. Either way, it's going to be a fascinating lot of races to watch this weekend, particularly if Lucinda Brand competes. She recently posted to Instagram and Twitter to say that she hoped to be back in time for this weekend, which, if true, would be a phenomenally quick recovery from her fractured wrist. You can tune into all the action this weekend at the European Championships in all GCN Plus territories without restrictions. Here's a quick promo to get you in the mood. I'm really looking forward to those championships, as I am towards the next round of the USCX, which are this Saturday and Sunday. They take place in Falmouth in Massachusetts. Coverage on Saturday will start at 3:30 local time, 7:30 p.m. in the UK, while Sunday's event is a little later in the UK, and that's because the clocks go back in Massachusetts on Saturday night. As on Sunday, it's 8:45 p.m. UK time, but 3:45 p.m. local time. Like the European Championships, you'll be able to watch in all GCN Plus territories, but there are some restrictions though on the Saitama Criterium this Sunday, so if you want to watch that, please make sure you check if it's available where you are. Our documentary this week is all about one of the most famous climbs in cycling, the Stelvio. Jonathan Schubert is joined by former pro rider Adam Hansen to explore the history and legends of the Stelvio and the surrounding regions, as well as meeting people whose lives have been shaped by that particular mountain. Here's a sneak peek.
You have to show this mountain a lot of respect.
If you don't have respect, you get the payback.
That ambitious time you set us is getting close, and I don't think I'm going to make it on my own.
Alpe d'Huez is not so steep. Stelvio is much more difficult. It was a never-ending climb.
But it is more brutal than any of you could have imagined. This is for the tough guys, no doubt about that.
That documentary will be out for you all to watch tomorrow on GCN Plus. In other news, Sonny Colbrelli has made the very difficult decision to call time on his professional career. The Italian collapsed at the end of stage 2 of the Vuelta a Catalunya this year, having suffered a cardiopulmonary arrest. He was later fitted with a subcutaneous defibrillator, but whilst that has allowed him to return to leisurely riding and normal life, Colbrelli and his doctors felt that the risk of returning to competition would be too high. Now, in some ways, I'm sure that was a fairly easy decision when faced with the potential consequences of racing, but at the same time, that must have been the hardest decision he's ever had to take. This time last year, he was winning Paris-Roubaix and at the very top of his game, and that will now remain the last win of his professional career. Colbrelli will now take a role at Bahrain Victorious, which will include mentoring riders as well as sponsor liaison. We wish you all the best for the future, Sonny. And finally, a few bits of team and transfer news. Miguel Angel Lopez is rumoured to be looking for a new team. He apparently fell out of Astana after being arrested in the summer on suspicion of drug trafficking. They suspended him for that before reinstating him in the team. But the question is, where would he go? You'd imagine that Movistar will be out of the question, and there can't be too many teams looking for a GC leader at this time of year. One place he won't be going to is Cofidis, who announced that their 2023 roster was completed with the signing of the Belgian rider Christophe Knopp, who's been with Arkea Samsic for the last 3 years. Some more news has emerged about Doug Ryder's new team, courtesy of an interview that Vincenzo Nibali gave to media whilst at the Singapore Criterium. The main sponsor will be clothing brand Q36.5, and the squad will be made up of 23 riders. Tuto Bici listed the riders that they think will form a part of the team, with Moschetti and Brambilla moving across from Trek Segafredo, Damien Howson and Jack Bauer from Bike Exchange, Mark Donovan from Team DSM, plus Badalati, Federli, Conca, Pupio, Rapp, Devrient, Parisini and Calzioni. A more official announcement is due in early November, so that's pretty soon. Now, an announcement that was due to happen ahead of the Tour de France presentation last week was from B&B Hotels. However, the press gathering was cancelled at the very last minute. The team is strongly rumoured to be the destination for Mark Cavendish for next season, but since then, he's been spotted riding a factor bike, leading to more rumours that he might be on his way to Israel Premier Tech. And we can assume that we will find out sooner or later either way. Now, it was confirmed last week that Drone Hopper will only race with a continental licence in 2023, which is a real shame for Italian cycling. Gianni Savio's team has been around since 1990 and has almost always been in the sport's second division, whatever that was called at the time. Over those years, Savio has scouted and nurtured a large number of riders who've gone on to bigger and better things. Most notably, perhaps, Egan Bernal, who rode for his team in 2016 and 17. It's another blow for Italian professional cycling, which has seen a real demise over the last decade or so. Now, unfortunately, I am finishing with the sad news that Brian Robinson passed away last week at the age of 91. A real trailblazer was Robinson, the first Brit to compete at the Tour de France, the first Brit to win a stage at the Tour de France, and the first Brit to be on the podium of a monument classic. He also won the Criterium de Dauphiné, amongst other races, in 1961. He was a true legend who'll be sorely missed, so our sincere condolences to his friends and family and everyone that knew him. Rest in peace, Brian.